Ready.
All right, let's play our countdown and then we'll be ready. All right. So I want to welcome everyone to Love Over Coffee, Voices Not Heard. This is a podcast and platform for the marginalized, the silenced, and the abused. And we are here tonight with Connie Filesteel. She is going to share with us her own personal story. And I'm sure along the way we will discuss other areas of narcissistic abuse. So, um, Connie, I always start with the same question. So take a moment and tell us who you are, tell us where you've been, and tell us where you're going. And we will cover those three things, but I just want to give people who are listening or watching a brief view of you. Please tell us only what you feel comfortable or safe sharing because it is your story and you have total control of that. So go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Well, my name is Connie. I am a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm a daughter, and I'm an educator. I have over about 20 years of experience as an educator, and
Something we have in
I
common. I'm a teacher as well.
yeah, I was a teacher. I worked all over Arizona, Pennsylvania, and then I went on to Penn State to work on my PhD, where I'm on final stages of doing that. And I'm American Indian. I grew up on my Ani and Nakota homelands in North Central Montana, and I have kind of just really I grew up here, but I left to attain my graduate degrees, my professional experience. And I was a single mother. I raised my daughter. I have a beautiful daughter who's in law school right now, becoming a
Ooh,
lawyer. And
we
so
need
I,
her. We need her.
yes, we do. And basically, who I am is, I'm an American Indian woman who has really tried to um, do the best I can in the roles that I have been given in life. And those biggest roles are mother, grandma now, a daughter. I still have my mom. She's 85 years old.
Wow.
I lost my dad about 7 years ago. And so that's who I am in a nutshell.
Okay. So I know you're here tonight to talk a little bit about your own story of narcissistic abuse. So, for those who are listening out there, um, narcissistic abuse can be physical, but it is not always physical. Many times it is more mental, emotional, social, intellectual, financial, and sexual control. Um, it is abuse. Um, but I think many times we see abuse as, or we believe it is, um, physical. I know in my own situation, and I was never hit. So in my mind, I wasn't living in an abusive situation because he never hit me. And I think many people, men and women, will say this. I do want to say up front, this is Connie's story. Your story may be similar, it may be different. You may be male or you may be female, but I want you to understand that predominantly abuse is still targeted against women more often than men, although it is not to be left out. So please, if you are male and you wish to tell your story, by all means, you are welcome to contact me. but I do want to make sure you're aware that predominantly abuse is still targeted against women more often than men. So, Connie, I want you again, tell us what you feel safe telling, and what you feel comfortable. And I want to say hey to Karen and to Patricia, Aunt Pat. They are tuned in. Um, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, Tina, the biggest when I reached out to you, actually, I was on Clubhouse and I was in a group, and your name was recommended because I said, I really want to start telling my story about my experience with a narcissist because I believe it's important. I believe these stories are important for us to share because, especially with narcissistic abuse, you don't know what you're dealing with until you actually experience it, right? And because we know these narcissists are really good con artists, I
Hmm.
mean, this is really imperative. I believe what God has been telling me is you share this story so that you can help other women. And so I'm not really a big person to put myself out there.
No.
This whole sometimes gives me anxiety, but I believe it's uh, my job to do that, and I believe Creator really wants me to do this because locally I came back home in 2000, probably 13, 14, 15, around that time, and I started working with our tribal council on we're one of 8 federally recognized tribes in Montana on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. We have 2 tribes here, and when I was working with the council back in 2019, we had we have the highest suicide rate here on our tribal homelands in the whole nation. So suicide among our youth primarily, but also among our young adults, our adult people, our older and our elders as well. And as I was working with the council and I was hearing some of these workers go out on calls, on these calls where people were taking their, attempting to take their lives, some of these stories that were coming back from the workers about, I had to help this young mother. She just broke up with her husband and it was devastated for her. I thought there, it really clicked with me that maybe that young woman was dealing with a narcissistic relationship to where she wanted to take her life. And I thought I really need to start doing awareness on this at some point because um, my experience, I would have never thought someone like me would have fallen for a narcissist, but I
Me
did,
neither. Me neither.
because
Hmm.
I I always felt I had a good head on my shoulders, and I'm working on my PhD. Connie, you're almost a doctor. How did you fall for someone like this, right?
Welcome. Yes, I did the same. And Connie, I was almost 50. I was 50. So, when my life was most aligned, online, offline, friends, family, strangers, 2 degrees. Not to say that someone without a degree should be more vulnerable, but I think it was really hard for me to wrap my brain around, especially once it was over. It's like,
Yes,
what just happened and what was that? And
right.
why did I fall for, I call them the good old fashioned snake oil salesman. I mean,
Yes,
I did not realize the degree to which these people exist and what they are
right.
capable of, because I was unsuspecting. And I think
Hmm.
our young people are as well.
Exactly. And I believe there's a lot of narcissistic men, especially within our American Indian communities, because this topic is not discussed right. It's called NPD, right? Narciss, or what is it called? It's
Narcissistic personality disorder, that's
there
right.
you there you go. So we don't really know. Like we hear of the traditional different mental illnesses and stuff, but no one really talks about narcissism. But you don't really know what it is, like I say, until you experience it yourself.
But Connie, you bring up an interesting point, because I do believe that maybe some communities are almost like cranking them out at
Hmm.
higher numbers,
Yep.
because I've heard a lot of women in Africa say that
Hmm.
many of their men are narcissistic.
Yep.
Um, and I've heard the same thing um, for the black community as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know, I can't diagnose narcissistic personality disorder,
Hmm.
but I can certainly look at the list of criteria, which Karen is on, so I know she could put it up for us. But, you know, I think that our society in general is cranking them out at a higher
Yes.
number. And I mean, you know, it is culturally based in some ways, and I don't mean culturally based as in the black community or the Native American community or the African community, but I mean it is culturally based in, we have lots of young kids who seem to have, because I see it in the education system too, this sense of entitlement and this sense of, you know, somehow they're one up from everyone else. And there
Right.
is no stop to that thinking, and the trauma.
Mhm.
People believe that narcissism is created by trauma, and so is an empath. Well,
Mhm.
Lord knows half our world, if not more, has suffered some sort of trauma.
Right.
So how do we combat that?
Hmm. Right. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer, but
Either.
I believe that the more we talk about it and the more
Mhm.
videos like this, the more discussion in the conversation, the more education on it is how we make people aware of it. Um, and also, because once I really learned what I was dealing with, because let me back up. Um, I, I guess when I was going through what I was going through, I didn't know what it was, but it was really weird to me. I was telling myself, Connie, you are a smart person. You don't get into relationships with people like this. How is it you're in this position? You know it's not you, but then you're actually feeling sad about it. You're actually,
Right.
this person is all wrong and not a good person, and everything that has happened, but yet you still feel. And so I learned about trauma bonds and how these
Mhm.
narcissists work. And really what led me to start researching and YouTubing it was when I found out the narcissist was cheating on me. I found the cell phone list, right? His cell phone list, and I found all these numbers. I
Oh,
suspected the cheating, I just didn't have the evidence. So I found his password, got into his phone and his phone bill, and I saw all these numbers, like long minutes of conversations. And so, though they were all women, and I got all their names because I called them. actually, actually, there were some men on there too. I will say that
wow.
there were men on there too. And one thing about these narcissists, I think a lot of narcissists, especially within men, they're bisexual.
Yes,
So
I agree. The guy that I was with once told me very early on, and I thought it was odd because it's like I don't even know what he's sharing. Okay, but he said that he was metrosexual, and I said, "What do you mean by metrosexual?" And he said, "Well, I'm very particular about my looks, my style, my image," and I thought to myself, "Oh, okay."
mhm,
And then someone else told me, jokingly perhaps, metrosexual was one bus stop shy of being gay. And I said, as I came to know the individual, because he uses people so much,
yeah, yeah,
that I got to thinking, he would use either gender if it gained him something.
yes, yeah.
Um, of course, I
They
have no knowledge. but
they're opportunists in every sense of the word. So they
yes,
will do,
opportunists.
they'll shape shift. So they'll pretend to be they'll pretend to be where they're what's the word for it, where they're not a um homosexual. They're the other,
Homophobic.
well, they'll
Homo-
pretend that this guy, he pretended he likes women, so he gets into a marriage, but actually the marriage is just the front, because actually
mm.
they're covert. He liked men
Oh,
too, I believe, right? So that
mm.
was another thing in my research that I learned, that a lot of these, and he was a covert narcissist. So
Yes, the
you
one I
can't
was
really,
involved with was as well,
yeah, you
covertly.
can't really tell. And so going back to how I really came upon trying to figure out what I was dealing with, because I had all these conflicting feelings, like, Connie is a pig. Why are you sad about this? Like, he did really
Right.
bad, some horrible things.
Like, why am I
Why
crying every day? Because the jerk is
why are
gone.
you, yeah. So what really led me to this was I remembered, as I was going through that cell phone list and talking to the different women, his ex-wife was on there, who he's now back in Canada. She
That
was one
is
of the women, and she was the one that said he's a narcissist. And at the time, that didn't mean nothing to me, because I didn't know anything
no.
about it until I start researching, and that came to mind, and I start Googling narcissist, and all these YouTube videos start coming up. So Dr.
And they
Brian,
play the line.
yeah,
That is one thing. I mean, at the forefront of our relationship together was an ex who was the villain,
hmm,
and
yeah,
he was the victim. And
yes,
now I'm the villain and he's still the victim. And
yeah,
I'm a completely, totally separate woman and relationship. But he's been married several times. He's got children by several different women. Again, not to say that those are characteristics, but he attaches himself quite easily. And yet at the same time, it's like he never moves on. So he is, he's constantly going backwards to
hmm,
bother and annoy exes.
hmm,
He's massaging the one he's with now,
hmm,
presently, as a you know, making sure that he's continuing to groom that relationship
right,
to make
yeah,
sure that he's the victim and
hmm,
she's the savior. And,
exactly,
and then at the same time, they're always looking for new supply.
exactly, yeah. That's how they work.
Craziest thing. I mean,
Hmm,
again, until I like started going through stuff too, Connie. I went through his computer like there was no tomorrow, and oh my God, once I had access inside that computer, I found out so much, and yet I was still so attached
yeah,
that I could not let go. And I thought to myself, why can't you let the jerk go? Of
yeah,
course, I had all the financial stuff that he was continuing to try, but that is why the suicide rate among narcissistic abuse victims is so high, because you're away from the individual and yet you are devastated.
hmm.
It's like you have been destroyed from inside your soul.
Well, and the thing about that, so when I did the research, it's because that very first stage of the narcissistic relationship is the love bombing, right? You're going back and you're thinking about how that started, where they're mirroring you, that
All right.
they're mirroring you, and they're so then you go through all the stages, and then you're kind of left with trauma bonds from thinking about the first part of the relationship. Now, mind you, it wasn't like the best ever. It's just, I'm thinking, how could this person do this when that person presented them? I thought that was that person, and
Yeah.
not. They're con artists. When you said grooming, that's exactly what they do to their victims. They groom,
Hmm.
and because they're predators. and they're
They
always
are predators.
they're
Yes,
looking for
absolutely predators.
they're looking for their next victim. And I think in the context of MMIW, especially within our American Indian communities with our women, this narcissistic people, men and women, we really need to talk about this and bring more awareness to this. And so that's really my goal, is to bring more awareness to narcissistic people.
So we have to you know pause for a moment. First, welcome to everyone who's watching on TikTok, and thank you to everyone who's watching on Facebook and the business page, and YouTube. If you're on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. I know it's a shameless plug, but um, I think one of the hardest things to realize in regard to narcissistic behavior is there are narcissistic characteristics, narcissistic traits, narcissistic tendencies that perhaps all of us have to some degree because it is self-preservation.
Yeah.
But these individuals that we are talking about are beyond that. So I know I don't have a degree. I cannot diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, but there is a list of characteristics. And if you exhibit these 5 out of 9, chances are you have narcissistic personality disorder. There is no pill or cure for narcissistic personality disorder. In fact, one of the worst things you can do is actually go into therapy with a narcissist, because as much as they groomed you in the beginning to believe this illusion, they can groom a therapist if they are not wise. The
Mhm.
therapist will end up thinking that they are the victim and that you are the perpetrator. And so that is sadly a very common scenario. So narcissists also typically don't think they have an issue. So going to therapy is not necessarily what they would do willingly, but they would certainly do it to play the game.
Mhm.
And that is one of the things that I think we need to realize is that narcissists play lots of games to
Mhm.
keep you off your balance.
Yeah.
And when you're off your balance, that's when they say you're crazy. And they will say to other people, see, she's crazy.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where I think that the trauma bonding comes from not an attachment to them as an individual, but it is that attachment to the illusion
Right.
that you thought existed in the beginning, that you realize at the end of the day was a complete farce. It was a
Yeah.
complete lie. It
Mhm.
was fabricated to manipulate you.
Yep.
And that manipulation and that gaslighting is what sets aside narcissistic personality traits and tendencies, or narcissistic traits and tendencies and characteristics from
Right.
the full-blown narcissistic personality disorder,
Right.
because these are mentally disordered individuals.
Mhm.
And when you get caught up in their world, when you leave their world, um, number one, they don't leave you alone.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, what have you dealt with? Because one of the things that we talked about briefly when you emailed me is the hoovering,
Mhm.
the constantly trying to get to you or get at you or get
Right.
through you and through other individuals. But
Mhm.
in particular, are you able to talk at all about any of those characteristics that the narcissist in your story exhibit?
Well, well, there's definitely the hoovering, because like you say, there's multiple victims here, right? They have multiple, they put you on a shelf. So when they're found out, like when I found him out, um, and then I after I start learning and educating myself about what I was dealing with, I actually went gray rock. I just see, he's a predator and he uses people like most narcissists. He
So, do
lives
you
off
want
of,
to explain what gray rock is for those people who are
yep,
listening but don't know?
right. So gray rock is just basically that, in that you make yourself so uninteresting and so unappealing to them, to a predator, to a con artist. And this type of a narcissist that I was involved in a relationship with is he doesn't work. He didn't work. He lived off of women. He lived
Did
off of
we,
women. So
did
that
we
was
date the
his.
same guy? We must have dated the same guy.
Yeah, and then he's attracted to women who he thinks has money, right? Who he can just go live off of and who's going to be good with that. Because that's how his father, that's what he grew up watching and seeing, the male role model in his life, right? So I just went gray rock. No money, very uninteresting, very unappealing. I no contact, I did no contact. At the beginning, I had to go through a divorce with him because we had a wedding ceremony, but I didn't sign my marriage certificate because there were all those red flags there, right?
Oh, okay.
And I didn't do the marriage certificate. So I really didn't think I was legally married to him. But then after I learned that, yes, in this state of Montana, you're considered
Mm.
uh, common law married. So I did have to go through that. But I basically just gray rocked it. I made myself, um, no money. I'm broke, and and
Well,
so
I really was broke. So,
yeah,
Connie, I really was broke. By the time I left the relationship, I was really broke.
yeah,
But I did the same thing. I got to the point where, as he was, it's called verbal vomit or word salad.
hmm,
I can remember us sitting in the kitchen together, and he's just blah 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 blah, and I'm sitting there, but I'm completely tuned out, and I am basically pretending. Oh yeah. Oh, you want me to call that person tomorrow? Okay. And I'm
okay,
doodling. I'm doodling. I'm not taking.
yeah,
I'm not taking notes. I'm not doing anything, um, because I knew that within 24 hours he'd be on to something else, because he was always this. Um, he was always the victim, but he always had these ideas, but none of them ever got followed through,
right,
and I couldn't figure out, except to, I cut him off financially.
right,
And that is when I saw in my own situation the rage, the
yeah,
injury,
hmm,
because I don't think he ever thought that time would come,
yeah,
because I had been controlled for so long.
yeah.
The relationship I was in was 39 months from start to finish. How long was yours?
It was less than, I think it was almost maybe 4 years.
4 years.
And the thing about him was, see, it's funny. I mean, I'm trying to prepare for this. I'm trying to wrap my head around everything and trying to do the best I can in making this concise. But there's so much complexity when you're involved with a narcissist, right? So one of the things is when he and I got together, I didn't know this, but he was married. Legally, he was married to a woman in Canada. So that's who he's with now. He went back to her.
Mm.
I didn't know he was married. He said he was divorced. And then, and then I'm kind of mad at myself because you should have asked for the divorce papers to see them. But you're,
But
you
honey, that's not normal. We trust
exactly,
people. People say
exactly.
they're divorced all the time. They're divorced.
Yeah,
It's like, show me your papers. But with a
right.
narcissist, you really do.
You do. So that's another piece of this education is you have to kind of ask for stuff like that because if, as for me, they prey off of trusting people, right? These narcissists, they can tell, they kind of see you and sniff you out, and they
They
kind
do.
of know who their next victim is.
They really
And
do.
I wasn't going to say, okay, show me your divorce papers. I believed him because he actually had a friend justifying and reiterating what he was telling me. And so,
Oh, that's classic too.
yes,
It's
They,
like
yeah,
my friend says, and my friend sees, and my friend knows, and
yeah,
again, you don't question. And we should both go back and say, at this point, we do have a PhD. It's in narcissistic behavior
yeah,
because
exactly.
I don't know about you, but I often say I feel like I met someone, dated someone, broke up with someone, and then earned a PhD in narcissistic behavior because
Right.
I went down the rabbit hole of what in the hell just happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Because that was the craziest roller coaster ride I've ever been on in my life. And
Right.
I knew from the beginning that I didn't like roller coasters. And
Yep.
yet somehow I bought into the whole roller coaster ride.
Right.
And it was the craziest thing. Um, but I mean, they manipulate the way people change underwear. I mean,
Yeah.
really, they are so good at it that it would it would be hard to figure it out
Hmm.
until you figure it out. Like
Exactly.
your gut is telling you something,
Yep.
but your brain does not want to believe
Hmm.
or
Yep.
distrust. And that
Right.
is where and I had someone once tell me, our picker is not off. Their picker is on.
Yeah.
They can, as you said, they can sniff you out.
Yep.
They really seriously can find victims quite easily,
Yeah.
um, because they prey on your vulnerabilities. They interrogate you like an interview by the police department. You know, they interrogate you and they figure out all this stuff about you,
Yep.
and then they use it
Yep.
first to gain you and then to try to manipulate and to then create anxiety and
Then
all the other things.
sabotage what I'm dealing with
Sabotage,
now. So
yes.
I divorced him back in 2018, but he re-enters my life in 2023 in my father's probate, where he's trying to sabotage and make me look like a criminal when he himself is the criminal. Like, he told me he wasn't married. I mean, in most places, what is that called? Adultery, when you're married and you go be with
Yeah,
someone
that's a
else.
bigamist.
I
That's a
mean, yeah,
bigamist.
exactly. So, you know, um, it's crazy how they work, and they have a lot of flying monkeys. So that's what they're called, right? These friends who are there saying, "Oh yeah, reiterating what they're telling you." Like when he and I got together, he, of course, he made his ex-wife sound like she was a monster, and then he had friends there and family of his own family. This woman is evil, she's a monster, and you kind of believe it because if they're all saying it, okay, it must be true, right? And so that's what another really big red flag, and that's how narcissists work, is they have all
And
these flying monkeys.
the flying monkeys, I think some I often questioned. I felt like some flying monkeys were wise to his games because they were maybe also narcissists, and so
Yeah,
they were paired up together.
yeah.
But then there were also the unsuspecting flying monkey,
Hmm.
and I got to the point though where I couldn't really separate the two groups, so
Yeah.
I just started not interacting with
Mhm.
individuals. And the ones that have stayed in my life are the ones that I think were unsuspecting
Yeah.
and being used by him, and saw over time
Right.
what I saw, or
Yeah.
saw through his interactions with me
Mhm.
exactly what he was about. Because I know that the individual I was involved with has been with three or four, or five women maybe since me,
Yeah.
um, and I don't know how many. I really, um, I really
Yeah.
lost count when we
Yeah.
were together because there were so many.
Right. Well, I think you're spot on when you say the flying monkeys. Some of them are aware because they themselves are narcissists. I think that's his own family. I think he comes from a very
Mm.
narcissistic family. They knew exactly what he is. and they kind of view you right when you come into the relationship as, oh, this is the next victim. They know exactly, but no one warns you, because even if someone were to warn you
You
in the
wouldn't
beginning,
believe
or me,
it.
I wouldn't have known. I mean, it's sad to say, you kind of have to go. The only way I really believe this is that I went through it myself. I believe that
I'm there. I agree, Connie.
prior to that, I thought, well, he's a womanizer. He's been through a lot of women, but then they give you the story. I'm settled down. I love the Lord. I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs. Things like that. They give you this story, so you kind of think they're changing, and that's part of the
they're on
grooming.
they're on a spiritual journey. That was
Exactly.
the guy I was with was on a spiritual journey, and he was so happy to share that journey with me. He
Yeah.
loved who we were and who we are and where we're going and all the things we're going to accomplish together. And
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like, really?
Yeah. Like future faking. They're very good at
Oh,
future faking
yes.
too. And so, you know, I think the flying monkey thing, they have a lot of those flying monkeys, and this one does, even in my home community, but in his own community as well within his family. And so I've been divorced with him, have had no contact with him, don't care. I don't want to have contact with him, but his family still actually, it still like stalks me, and still don't like me, which is really, really bizarre. But um you know it's trying to put
Well,
a
to some degree, Connie, I think family also learns to almost stay out of their way. Like
Mhm.
it's almost like the family knows that they can be drawn in, and so some of
Mhm.
them, even though they know who he is and what he does and how he operates, they stand back a little bit, and it's
Yep.
almost like they watch and they wait until it's another failed relationship.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
think the family also gains while they're with the individual because it means they're not bothering them.
Yeah. Mhm.
I mean, that's what I saw
Mhm.
in my own situation. Karen has a comment up. Narcissists can't regulate their own emotions. They keep chaos and drama going on while using a person as an emotional punching bag. This is how they get supply, energized of the emotional reactions of others.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
their fuel.
and they triangulate too. Like, I'm thinking of him with his family with me. Like, all along he was pitting me against his family, and then he was going to them and pitting them against me, so we both thought each other were the bad people.
Right,
Really, it
right.
was him.
Right, absolutely. No, no, I sadly, I can relate 200%, because they all operate in a similar fashion. Some of what they may manipulate may be different, but they all manipulate.
Right.
Um, they gaslight. So,
Yep.
um, gaslighting. There is an old movie called Gaslight. And if you ever catch it, there are two versions of it. And it is, I mean, the premise of the story is that it is a woman living alone whose, I think, mother or father, I mean, I think it was her father just passed. So
Hmm.
she is vulnerable.
Yeah.
She gets involved with a man, and he plays these games where he turns up the gas in the lights in the house.
Hmm.
And when she says the lights were flickering, he says she's imagining things.
Hmm.
And it literally is, it's him playing with the gas in the lights up and down. And he convinces her that he doesn't see what she sees,
Hmm.
that he isn't experiencing what she's experiencing.
Wow. Yeah.
And in the movie, he brings in other people to say they didn't see it either.
Mhm.
And she honestly believes she's going crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
And he wants her to think she's going crazy because he wants to be able to search the house
Mhm.
for something that belonged to the father that was quite valuable.
Right.
And so he is living in the home, and there's one scene that really gets to me, and that is they're at a public event, and while she is enjoying it to some degree, he then says something to her privately that creates a situation where she bursts out
Mhm.
and she starts crying, and he then uses that to tell others something's wrong with her.
Yeah.
And if
Yep.
you've ever been gaslit,
Yep.
which I didn't really know what that term meant, but if you've been gaslit, you really do have those moments where the simplest of things you doubt.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I have a friend, her name is Nikki G, she's on Clubhouse, and she is sometimes my, and Karen is too, my uh is the sky still blue and the grass still green? Because I'm thinking maybe this is something a little off. And it's almost like I have to check in to say something feels off.
Yeah.
I need to listen to the little voice. And so
Mhm.
it's like, is the grass still green and the sky still blue? And usually when I do that, they're feeling the same off balance.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, as you said, they sniff us out.
Mhm.
They definitely figure out your vulnerabilities. They definitely manipulate.
Yep.
So you mentioned about your father,
Yep.
the probate court. So he's trying. I can
So
only imagine the story that he's trying to come up with and what he's the narrative he's trying to write.
yeah. So
Um,
yeah. So he they use vulnerable situations against you. And at that time, when I found out all of the cheating, well, let me also go back and say that I found out he was an addict.
mhm,
So he was an addict of everything on the spectrum that you can think of. So after we were together and we had the ceremony, but I didn't sign the marriage certificate, um, he was smoking weed. So I thought, okay, I'm not a I'm not a weed smoker. I didn't grow up around drugs, but
right.
um, I wasn't happy with it. He knew it. You know, there were some stipulations I put in place. But after I found out he was a narcissist, I found out, okay, it started with weed, but then it was snorting pills. He's a pill snorter. Then he was on meth. Then he's a sex addict. So that means the pornography, the going on sex websites where he has interactions with, sexual interactions online with women, possibly men too. And so then ultimately there's the sex addiction of cheating where they have multiple women, right? And multiple partners, whether it be men or women. And so that's the other piece of this too, that once you find out there's one addiction, there's probably multiple, especially
Yes,
the
yes. I
narcissist.
discovered the same. I
Yeah.
discovered the um when the individual I was involved with was living in another state. Um, he would tell me that he used to smoke marijuana when he needed to do some calming down in order to write music.
Yeah.
Well, once we were living together, that need to smoke was
Mhm.
every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All
And
all day.
right, every day, all day. And that was a side I had not seen before. And I was like, okay.
Mhm.
Um, and while in general I don't have a big anti-marijuana platform, it was
Yeah.
something that I didn't know about him. And so I was a little surprised. I was a little taken aback. There's that red flag that I made
Yeah.
pink. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But then, like you, when I started realizing more and more what was happening, and as I gained access to more and more information, um, I realized that there was some porn sites being
Mhm.
visited.
Yeah.
And I also realized that, I left the dating site when I met him. He, on the other hand, never left the dating sites.
Mhm.
And so those were things that I discovered later. But I agree, even now, I realize and I wonder if there weren't other addictions.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Mhm.
because he would hang around individuals that were going to clubs,
Yeah.
and I thought, I don't think they're necessarily going to the clubs to sell marijuana.
Yeah.
That's not the club scene's
Right.
um, addiction. The
Yeah.
club scene is probably crack or crystal meth or something a little bit more. But again, I don't have the information, but I certainly have the suspicion because the behaviors were always so off, and the
Yeah.
mood swings.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, the other thing that people need to know too is that dating websites are playgrounds for
Mm,
narcissists. So the narcissist I was with, he was on every dating site, and the one I had to really laugh at that he was on Elite Singles, and on his profile, he played himself up to be. He had a master's. He was a family man. No drugs. No alcohol. S- Very very similar to what he had said to me when we got together, and so it's all the things you want to see. They know exactly as predators. They know in order to be on Elite Singles, I think you had to be educated. There were certain
mhm.
criteria, right? So
Right.
he put everything on there that he thought a woman
They
would want.
reel you in, don't they?
It was so it
Listen,
was hilarious.
my company is not called Real Change by accident.
Yeah.
They reel you in. They put it. It's like they throw everything at the wall and they see what will stick. But
Mhm.
I met the individual that I was involved with on Plenty of Fish, and I
Mhm.
realized that Plenty of Fish. My mother always said there are plenty of fish in the sea. What she forgot to tell me was that some of them are sharks and barracudas, but
Yeah.
they pretend to be fish.
Yeah.
And they're also, it's so much more than catfishing because these individuals, they play very close to a line of truth
Mhm.
as well as the lie. It's almost
Yes.
like, so if I stand on this side, it's kind of a lie, but if I stand on this side, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
And you're saying, well, maybe this is what they meant, and you
Right.
excuse it.
Yep.
But the websites are, oh my goodness. I keep saying this. My brother often says, piece of paper will lie still and let you write whatever you want on it. Well, so does a dating site profile. You
Right.
can put anything you want to on there, and they do. They go for, they look, if they want to be with an educated woman, then they're educated. If they
Mhm.
want to be with someone that has children, so they can play the savior of the
Yeah.
family by being the greatest mom or greatest dad, then they go after women with children or men
Right.
with children. They
Right.
will go after what they are seeking and what they know they can play.
Right. Exactly. There always has to be some altruism involved with them to make them look like the good
Mhm.
person. And so
Mhm.
this narcissist that I was with right now, he's preying off of an older woman who's his sugar mama, but also she has a child like that has Down syndrome. So when you look at things, it's like, oh, he's just so nice, really helping with this little Down syndrome child. So there's always, they're always very cunning and very calculating about how they make their appearance because they know they're a predator, but they're portraying themselves and they're putting that publicity out about, oh, nice guy helping with this child who has Down syndrome. Oh, he must just have a kind heart. He must,
Oh, yes.
so
Oh,
they have no limits to the levels that they will sink and who they
no.
use. And so that's the other thing too about, you brought up my dad's probate. They come back. Like, I have had no contact with him. I actually, when I found out the cheating, I actually sent him back up to his ex-wife, and was hoping that's where he would go like right away. But he didn't. He stayed around. He tried to get back with me. He triangulated us, so he was up there pretending to be the victim to her, saying he wanted to get back with her, but then he was also trying to get back with me. But to make a long story short, um, I went gray rock. I had no contact with him, but he re-entered into my life with my father's probate, which he did have involvement in, but he totally switched his story up. So they have no levels. They will sink to any levels. They will use any type of, like, this was a horrible experience for me, that what I went through with my father and my family when my father died. But he came back, and he's attempting to disrupt all that. Just, what he's mad because, I mean, I don't get it. Like, why?
Well, is there, I mean, they play to whatever will work. Okay.
Mhm.
So this is a reason why he could come back into your life. So could he gain financially from this?
Well, he was probably paid by my other siblings who are contesting my father's will. He was more than likely paid because he doesn't do anything for free. There's always has to be a
Right.
narcissist. There always has to be something in it for him. And right
Mm-hmm.
now, from what I understand, he's working with a tribe. He's also conning that tribe right now into giving him a big responsibility that he's totally incapable of.
Yes.
Because
Hmm.
remember, narcissists, their lives are one failure after another. They know they're going to fail. And so a lot of times they self sabotage themselves. And being the con artists that they are, they go into these communities. Like, nobody knows him up there. In here, Montana, everybody
Right.
knows.
Right.
So he's on to new territory. He's and that's how these narcissists work. They move to new areas
Oh
where
yes, absolutely.
nobody knows them, totally unsuspecting. And so he's conning this tribal nation into giving him a responsibility that he's totally incapable of. So, there's so much education that we need to do on these types of, especially for our, and I'm thinking in the context of our MMIW with our women, who are going missing, who are being beaten a lot. We have high domestic violence, who are being abused. And so that's on this journey. I really want to make sure that I'm putting this out there in the sense of, I want to help educate and I want to help save some lives. And like me, I didn't know what I was dealing with. And I
No.
would have hoped to have someone talk about this more. And when I
Mhm.
did start learning, when I remembered what the woman said, he's a narcissist, I start Googling it, and that I start
Yeah.
watching the videos. Totally, I knew
It
100%
started
that,
to make sense.
yes,
Yes.
it did.
In my own situation, I found a letter that his ex-wife had written to him when she was obviously in the court system with him, because that's his
Mhm.
favorite place to play. And it said he was a narcissistic sociopath. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And by that time, I knew what the word meant, but I did not yet understand the full scope of the abuse.
Right.
And like I said, For me, I was involved in a relationship where there was no physical component, as far as no physical abuse
Mhm.
and no sexual abuse. So in my mind, it wasn't abuse until I realized the scope of narcissistic abuse and what that entails. And it's for those of us who have truly experienced narcissistic abuse, I don't think we have a question in our mind what we have been through.
Right.
But
Yeah.
until you've been through it, it's one of those things where people see it as a normal relationship, and somehow it's not a normal breakup, and it's almost like you can't get over it. And I'm thinking, I can't get over it because there's no moment for closure.
Right.
So you have to move on and you have to move on, and
Yeah.
you have to take control of your own healing.
Right.
And so that, and I believe that many of us become educators in one way or another
Mhm.
by reaching back to the community because we were unsuspecting.
Right.
This podcast grew from the fact that I knew my own story, and I knew other people's stories matched mine, and I wanted to give platform
Right.
and give people a chance to tell their story,
Yeah.
to get the educational component out there,
Right. Yeah.
because without the education, without other people's information, I would never have known what I was living.
Yeah. Exactly. Hmm. Yep.
um
That's true. I'm
so
real
with
thankful for all the YouTube videos because that's what really helped
right.
me. Once I start
Mhm.
learning about it, it really helped me to understand, and then that was closure for me because I knew what I was dealing with. I was dealing with a narcissist, but as probably a sociopath too, as I
Mhm.
think about and really look in
Mhm.
retrospect. And then as I read about, how their the environment kind of creates a narcissist that they grew up
Right.
in, things just really made sense for me. And that was really my closure. And I knew I wanted closure before then because it was like he was all wrong for me from the get-go, but there was something that drew me in, like the con artist drew me in.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
after I learned about what this narcissist is, that was closure. That was the gray rock. That was, no contact, nothing. And so I'm real thankful for these videos, and I'm really thankful. I want to extend my appreciation to you for allowing me to come onto your show. And I hope to do this more and get everything down in a way where the more I do it, the more impact it may have for other women.
Well, and you know, do you envision? I wanted to, before I go there. So Karen says Christian dating sites are full of narcissistic people and toxic manipulators, male and female.
Yeah.
Um, Shirley says ecstasy is mostly the club scene. Yes, absolutely, Shirley, and I do think there was some of that flowing. um, and then Carol, she says Tina helped me figure out what was going on. I'm so grateful for her friendship. Ah, well, Carol, we both know that you and I dated the same narcissist, and Lord knows I'm glad I kept you and not him. But anyway, so do you envision starting something that's a more organized way to educate? How are you imagining? Because I asked you who you are and where
Yeah.
you've been. We covered that. So
Yeah.
where do you think you're going? What platform do you hope to create that will educate the American Indian communities, in particular your own tribe, perhaps?
Well, I'm back in my own community now. I'm here to stay and I want to make impacts with my own people here. And so with this in particular, it's just to start local conversations with women and local education on it. It's certainly not going to be my livelihood or anything, but I need to get the message out there. So I have a foundation, I have a business here that I started. And one of the things that we want to basically what it is to really try to lift our people up here locally, economically, spiritually,
Right.
in any way that we can, because we deal with such a high incidence of poverty. We have a lot of poverty here in our community. I think we have the third highest poverty rate in the state of Montana for any reservation. And so I really want to try to start doing something through that and just maybe start having discussions locally on what it is. Because, like I said, when I was working with council back in 2019, we had a really high suicide rate here. And I think in having these conversations, I'm hoping it will help educate more women on what they may be dealing with and not even know what they're dealing with. And I think that's some of the things that really lead our women because they're internalizing all of that. They think it's about them or they're not good enough or whatever. And with this education, it's my hope that they can also see for themselves that it's not about them. They are a good
Right.
mother, they're a good daughter, they're a good wife, they're a good person. It's this narcissist that is really creating all the havoc within their life. So
And
that's
even if we cannot say that the individual they're involved with is narcissistic, we also do see in general many people lead with their trauma.
right.
Poverty is a form of trauma.
Yeah. Hmm.
And when you lead with that trauma, you automatically feel as though you've got to fit in. And
Hmm.
so, if nothing else, the individuals they're involved with may be toxic. Even
Hmm.
if they don't have the label narcissist, I think that
Right.
many of us have been in toxic relationships prior to.
Hmm.
And then somewhere along the line, it's almost like you get involved with these what I call baby narcs
Yeah.
until you meet the really big one. But
Hmm.
it's because so many of us are going through life and not healing our trauma. And
Right.
trauma, you think about it, educationally, socially, politically,
Hmm.
um, mentally, emotionally, mental health is still a stigma in our country and in some communities more so than even in our overall country. And I
Right.
think that unless we can get into some of our traumas and heal ourselves from the inside, we search the outside for
Hmm.
what's missing on the inside.
Right.
And sadly, a relationship will never fill that hole.
Right.
Narcissistic, toxic, abusive, physical, doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Um, and addictions as well, drugs,
Right.
alcohol,
Yeah.
food, sex addictions. None of those addictions will ever fill the hole
Right.
that comes from the trauma that comes from the inside. And so we have to work from the inside to the outside because the
Right.
outside is never going to fill the inside.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And we have a lot of intergenerational trauma in our Indian communities. Just from all the policies
Yeah.
that have been taken out on our people. That's really what we're dealing with today is the historical and then the intergenerational traumas and that's part of what my work is doing here with
Right.
my companies is to really bring healing to our community, to myself, because I need healing. And so I'm including myself in that. And the only way we can make things better is for us to do that work within our communities and
Right.
just those conversations
Absolutely.
and start doing the work. So that's
Right.
that's my goal. So where you asked me where I want to be, I want to be in my home community and I want to help myself in my own home community as well as helping others. So
I love it. I think that's where many of us who are empaths, and as we get to a certain age, I think it's a natural inclination to want to reach back. We can look back at
Mhm.
our own life and see our mistakes and
Right.
see our shortcomings and then see where we fell short. Not that I will ever own the abuse, but I can certainly own my healing.
Right.
And when I own my healing, I can share my journey as well as my healing, and that will help to reach out and pull someone in with me.
Right.
Um, because again, we don't heal alone either.
Right. Exactly.
Um, so one of the things, okay, this is a shameless plug. I'm just gonna, you know, so one of the things that has grown out of Love Over Coffee, the podcast, is a Love Over Coffee subscription box.
Okay.
Um, it is a box that is filled with items,
Hmm.
knowledge, and activities that are focused on self care, self love, and healing trauma.
Okay.
This was the first box. This was the February March box. The May June box is getting ready to go out. It'll probably be the end of May, first part of June, and so I want this to grow. But right now we're doing 20 boxes
Okay.
every quarter.
Uh-huh.
Um, 19 of these have been spoken for.
Hmm.
So we have one left.
Okay.
So if you are interested out there, let me know. This box is 30. Like I said, inside it are items, information, knowledge, activities, things to bring in that daily ritual of pouring from a full cup. Because if you're not pouring from a full cup, you'll be constantly looking for someone else to fill that cup.
Hmm.
And so, Love Over Coffee came from. So for me, Connie, I was love bombed over coffee. One of the things that we did every day was Skype for hours
Oh, okay.
and
Uh-huh.
have coffee together.
Uh-huh.
And that is where a lot of the grooming happened.
Hmm.
And then after he gained me and my trust and money,
Yeah.
then he would manipulate and devalue um, coffee. My own situation got so crazy that we even had another woman living in our home with us that he was cheating with.
Mm.
And he would, when he was mad at me, he would say to her, um, well, let's have coffee later. And I,
Mm.
and it was something so emotionally like a
Yeah.
knife to the heart.
Hmm.
And at the same time, when he was mad at her, he would say the same thing to me. And it was a way for him to get one over on the other
Yeah.
and keep us separated from each other.
Hmm.
Um, and I honestly,
Triangulation. That's a
yes,
triangulation. Yeah.
and I honestly had to, I spent much of the pandemic reclaiming through the silence a love over coffee. So
Mm.
again, everything has come full circle. Everything is very intentional.
Yeah.
It took me a long time. I'm 5 years out. It
Hmm.
took me a long time for it to all come together.
Hmm.
Um, and I say only by the grace of God, and people like Karen and Carol and Clubhouse, because I found a lot of my community on Clubhouse when
Yeah.
Clubhouse was first beginning. Um, but I am honored and humbled to share space with another
Hmm.
narcissistic abuse survivor who has goals for her community,
Awesome.
um,
Thank
because that is where
you.
we will
Hmm.
heal not
Yeah.
only ourselves, but
Hmm.
it is reciprocated. As you heal others, they in turn will heal you.
Right.
So
Hmm.
um,
Yep.
that is an honorable thing. And I do think that many of us who speak so openly. We do it for those afraid to speak
Right.
or
Hmm.
whose lives were taken and they are unable to speak,
Right. Hmm.
because there are people who do
Yep.
commit suicide because of an inability to know or understand what narcissistic abuse really looks like and the toll it takes on you mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
So I want to take a moment and say thank you, TikTok, for tuning in. I know we haven't mastered the whole TikTok thing, um, because you only see me, you don't see my guest. But unless I want to hang something on the back wall here, I haven't figured out yet exactly how to showcase my guest. But this interview, and I hate to call them interviews, this story, this journey will be available on the Real Change page, REEL Change, on YouTube, Facebook, and on my own personal page, Tina M. Durbin. You are welcome to follow. Um, I know I am not the most public individual that's probably out there, but I am pretty damn public because I realized that I got one story. I ain't afraid to tell it. And my story hasn't changed from day one. And yet the narcissist has a million versions of this story. And I am just out there because I figure the one thing, trauma and abuse lives in the privacy of lies and secrets.
Hmm.
Therefore, one thing that a narcissist absolutely hates is being exposed.
Yes.
They
Yep.
may try to spin the exposure, but
Hmm.
that's okay,
Yep.
because trust me, they can't wear that mask forever. And eventually, they will be exposed,
Yep.
because their patterns of behavior. Um, they're not the most original individuals out there, shall we say, because they
Yep.
just play the same game over and over again. Hey, Miss Rosemary, my friend from childhood. Um, so thank you everyone for tuning in. Yes, Karen, our isolation is over now. As survivors, we have found each other, and it is through our strength that we will build stronger and educate the world. So, um, any final thoughts, Connie, before we say goodnight?
Um, well, I'm just really happy to be able to start telling my story and on your show here, your
We
live
were the
stream.
first. For that, we were the first.
Awesome, good, and I think just encouraging women out there to start if you're not sure what you're dealing with, just doing the research, like you say, your boxes with the self-help and getting ourselves strong, and that's through knowledge, and so I just encourage all the women out there, you're not alone. A lot of us go through this. There are multiple victims of narcissists, and so I'm here as a support, and I'm thankful that I have you, Tina, as a support, and just encourage all the women to do the work and getting educated on what you're dealing with. So,
I
yeah.
want to say I have not been as active on Clubhouse lately as I used to be. Um, to some degree, Gina loves my phrase, good or bad, right or wrong, real or imagined. I realize that my healing has moved into a different area, a different level. And
Okay.
so, as much as I needed to voice all the crap I couldn't understand and all the crap I needed to get out of my head,
Yeah.
it's out of my head now.
Yeah.
And so, my need to tell my story on Clubhouse hasn't been as great as it used to be when I
Okay.
first discovered Clubhouse and found my community.
Yeah.
The people I found on Clubhouse are still in my life, but not on Clubhouse as much. So I do want to say that I feel as though we do move through levels of our own healing, and I
Yeah.
am definitely at a greater deeper place in understanding the focus on healing,
Mhm.
although I am more than willing to tell my story. So if someone out there needs a podcast guest, I am more than happy to come on. I do want to say we are just 2 days away from, again, I can only say grateful to God. 2 years ago, I launched this podcast on June 1st, 2021. That is World Narcissistic Abuse Awareness Day.
Okay, cool.
And so on June 1st, we are having a celebration, so to speak, of some repeat guests and some new. So the 7 o'clock hour will be Donna Pollard. She has done a great deal of legislative work regarding child marriage, and the number of cultures and the number of states and communities that still allow people under the age of 16 to marry, sometimes with parents' permission, and that opens up the door for child predators. We've seen it with the fundamental Latter Day Saints communities, and with a lot of spiritual cults where they will marry young children. Um, at 8 o'clock, we have someone who is an author and speaker, Nicole Cleveland. She will be my guest at 8 o'clock. We're going to talk about some of the narcissistic abuse and how recovery can look. At 9 o'clock, I will be joined with Takesha Wade and Gary Nelson. Gary Nelson is a counselor on YouTube, and he just did a breakdown and a rehash and a review of Denia Jackson's interview, Derek Jackson's ex-wife. That was a narcissistically abusive relationship. They met at 19. And so we're going to talk about Gabby Petito. We're going to talk about, which there has been another development in that story. The young woman who was out west with her fiance, who then disappeared. She was subsequently found. It was determined it was homicide. And then Brian Laundrie, the individual who killed her, confessed in a notebook, and then found himself out in the middle of the swamp, and he ended up committing suicide. And so we're going to cover a little bit of the Gabby Petito story. We will do an update later on, but we will cover a little bit of that on at the 9 o'clock hour. Gary Nelson and Takesha and I will also do a little bit of a breakdown of some of the Denia Jackson interview. And then I have some podcasts that I'm pre-recording because it is 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning when you get to 10 o'clock at night. So I've got a guest from the United Kingdom who will join us, but it will be a pre-recorded segment, and then I have another guest that will be joining us. So we will basically be going from 7 till about midnight, and it will be back to back interviews that night. They'll be like 7 to 7:45. Take a short break because I'm going to need more coffee, and then we'll continue on. So there we are.
Wow, that's quite a schedule.
I want to tell everyone thank you out there. This podcast was created for the marginalized, the silenced, and the abused. If you've got a story to tell, reach out to me. Let's get you on the schedule. And also, I challenge you this week to go have a cup of coffee or tea or beer or hot chocolate, orange juice, I don't care what. But go sit down and have a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you, doesn't think like you, doesn't necessarily believe like you, certainly may not have had the lived experiences that you have had. Go sit down and have a conversation over coffee. allow that conversation to be reflective as well as change, because in our communities across the world, a lot more of us could actually afford to get back into interacting with others since the pandemic. But even before that, seeing someone else as human with a lived experience that may not be like our own. And I believe that across that conversation, we can take some of it in and be reflective, as well as we can share something that may be reflective to the other side. So, with that, I will say good night. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on Thursday at 7 o'clock. Don't forget. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end the TikTok first. So bye everybody on TikTok.
Bye bye.
Okay, and then I am going to end the podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Real Change, and my own personal page. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube page, it's looking sad over there. I think we got 4 or 5 people, but we're getting there. It's a new platform. So go like and subscribe to the page, make some comments. Some people are saying, thank you for sharing your story, Connie. Another good voice we heard. And if you are in an abusive situation, and you don't know where to turn, call the 1-800-799-7233, which is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And if nothing else, begin a conversation. Sometimes the first voice you need to hear is your own, telling what's happening. And as you tell what is happening, it begins to sink in that something is happening, that your body is right, and that you do feel something is off. So sometimes the first person who needs to hear your story is yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast now. So thank you, everybody. See you Thursday at 7. Good night.
See you.